Well, good morning. Welcome back to the shop. Today we're looking at a Bobcat with a no start condition, and usually one of these Bobcats won't start, especially with the Kubota engine. One of the first things we look for is a fuel related issue. And majority of the time it usually is a fuel related issue if one of these just either stopped while you were running it or the next day you went to start it and it wouldn't start, especially in the winter time. And I'll show you why. But first, let's take a look at the engine. I'll show you where I start diagnosing a fuel related issue. So we know that our battery's good because our engine's turning over fine. The engine's just not starting. The next thing that we do is we verify that our fuel pull solenoid is actually working when we turn the key on. And see, when the key's turned on, it does pull. And now that the fuel injection pump is open, now we got to verify that we're getting fuel to the injection pump. So down here on the bottom of your Bobcats, you're usually going to find, almost always going to find a little primer bulb. And we squeeze that bulb and see if it gets firm at all, and you can usually tell if it's pumping fuel through there. In this case, I don't feel anything. It's just pumping air. But I also need to make sure that if I lost prime, from the fuel tank, like if we ran out of fuel, this doesn't necessarily always pull fuel on its own. So I'll take the hose off here of the lift pump, and we have to put our finger on one side, squeeze the bulb, then put our finger on the hose, let go of the bulb, and then it'll start sucking it from the tank. So we got to verify that we didn't just run out of fuel. And we know our tank's got fuel in it. So I'll show you how I'll verify that pump real quick. And then we're also going to take a look at our lift pump. I've got one pulled out over here. This is after you get fuel through the primer bulb, your lift pump takes over and pushes it through the fuel filter into the injection pump. So let's take a look at how those two work real quick. So I've got a jar of diesel fuel to help demonstrate how this little primer bulb works. So see, if it's in our tank and I start squeezing the bulb, it's not necessarily going to prime itself. It does shoot a little bit. So what we do is we squeeze the bulb, put our finger over the end of the hose, and now fuel pulls into the bulb. Oh God, that stinks. So now that we got our bulb primed, it'll usually hold a prime and continue to pump. Now let's take a look at our lift pump. Now this is the lift pump on the engine. Once the primer bulb gets fuel to this takes over. This runs off the engine, the fuel camshaft. This piece right here, this plunger runs on a lobe. So if we press that plunger, we should be able to pump fuel. Just that easy. So now we know our lift pump's good. Put a little pressure over it, and we can tell that that's making pressure. That usually makes about 10-12 psi. So now that we verified that pump is good, we know that our issue is further back in the line. So next thing that we're going to check is the fuel line going from the primer bulb back to the tank. And if that looks good, no holes, no kinks, more than likely it's going to be our pickup tube in the tank. So let me show you how we go about checking that. So first thing we have to do is get our cab raised. And you can see I've already got the arms in the air, and I've got our support bar on the lift cylinder. Don't ever work under the arms without them supported with something. But what we've got to do is raise our cab, and all your Bobcats are going to have a nut and a washer here in the corner on both sides, and we have to remove those. And now we can push up on our cab to lift it up and gain access to the fuel pickup tube. So now that we've got our cab up, we're just going to dive right in here. And I've already taken the liberty of cleaning this whole engine bay out, but right down below under our pumps is where we're going to find our pickup tube. I got it lit up here and I've already cleaned it out. That's one thing you really want to do, is clean this area out, because we don't want to get any more debris in the fuel tank than we have to. Now you'll notice that we've got a fitting up here, and then we've got one right behind it back here. Okay, the one in the front right here is your pickup tube. That is the supply to the fuel pump. The one behind it is the return. Now we're not worried about that. Now this one's just held in with a grommet, and usually what I do with my pry bar is kind of come in behind it, up under it, and pry it up and out of that hole. Like that. And you can see right away that the tube, our pickup tube, is missing. And that's usually what happens, is the tube gets old, corroded, and kind of just dries and breaks off. And I usually see this a lot in the winter time because that tube is so brittle. So let's take a look at how we're going to fix that. So I've actually got a fuel tank. Now this is actually out of an 863, not a 763. So you notice that our supply and our return are next to each other. So if you're working on an 863, then the port closest to the filler neck is going to be your supply. So when you go to the Bobcat dealer and you order a new pickup tube, this is what they're going to give you. They're going to give you a piece of this clear line. We're going to have a pickup screen. It's got a little ball check in it. Now on the end of the tube here, I've already got a little clamp that they supplied. They usually give you two, one for each side, but I usually only put the clamp on the side that I'm going to put the pickup screen on. And we will force that in. Just like that. And the reason I don't put one up here, because we've also got this rubber grommet. I like to use a little WD-40. We'll slide the rubber grommet down on this position. Through the tube. And then you're going to have the 90-degree fitting. Now this is the one that we just popped out of the tank. Sometimes I replace these, sometimes I don't. But if you don't replace it, one thing that you really need to do is take the hose off this end. Usually you have to cut it. And also you have to cut your grommet off with the razor blade. And since this is a 90-degree, what happens is when your tube breaks, sometimes debris will get caught in this 90-degree area. You'll never see it, you'll never know it. You'll put a new pickup tube on and you'll still have a fuel starvation area, situation. So make sure we blow, compressed air through this fitting, check it out and make sure there's no debris stuck in there. And then I'll put the tube on the end of the clear tube, just like that. And I don't put a clamp. See, I can't, that's not coming off. That's like a push lock fitting, because when we have to push this back through our rubber grommet, if that clamps on there, sometimes it'll catch on this grommet and actually cut it. And so I just don't like to do that. All right, we're going to put our new pickup tube in the tank in this configuration. You can see our grommet is lower than the fitting here. And the reason is, if we put the grommet up on the fitting, we'll never get the grommet in the tank here. So our spring is kind of tight here. We'll just kind of walk it around, push it down, it'll drop right down in the tank. And then lower the tube down and we put the grommet in the hole. Make sure the grommet sits flat, and then we can take our 90-degree fitting and push that down into the grommet. And that's what locks the grommet into the tank. Now, if we were to put the grommet up on the fitting first like that and try to drop it in the tank, you will never, I say never, you're going to have a hell of a time getting that grommet to lock down in that hole when you're working inside the machine. I don't even think I can get it outside the machine. Nope. So that's why we leave that grommet, you know, in a lower position and install it first. And then you might also be wondering, well, what about the piece that broke off? It's in the tank. Isn't it going to cause an issue? It never does. Very rarely. I say rarely. I've never seen it cause an issue. So when it breaks off, we just leave it in the bottom of the tank. We never worry about it. To get this tank out of the machine, we have to pull the engine. And nah, we're just going to leave the tube in the bottom of the tank. All right, so now that we got that in there, let's get the machine put back together and test it out. And one thing I forgot to mention is that this screen is more than a screen. This is actually a check valve. This is what keeps the fuel from flowing back into the tank, you know, by gravity. So that's why you don't ever want to shoot compressed air coming from the engine side. Some people think that their fuel tube is clogged, so they'll just shoot compressed air through, you know, the engine side. And what happens, since that's a check valve, you're going to blow it off the bottom. You're going to blow your tube in half anyways, and you've already caused a problem. So don't ever blow compressed air back into the fuel tank on one of these machines. Now that I've got my fuel pickup tube installed on our machine, let's go in the back and show you how we prime it and get it started. So I'll start priming the engine by just getting the primer bulb and start squeezing it and see if I can start getting fuel from the tank itself. Okay, this one actually worked. So it started to get firm. So next thing we want to do is open the bleeder screw on our fuel filter housing. Just like that. We'll squeeze our primer until we start getting fuel out of that bleeder screw. And there it comes. We got good fuel flow out of the fuel filter housing. Now, up here on the injection pump, you'll notice there's a little knob here. And this is a jet valve or a bleeder valve. What we want to do is open that up and back it all the way out. And what that does is that helps us push the air and fresh fuel into the injection pump. So I'll squeeze that primer bulb a few more times. And then once we don't hear any more air squishing through there, I'll just go ahead and close that jet valve. All right, now we're gonna lower the cab real quick and see if the engine will fire off. Contact. So it runs good. Basically, that's all there is to troubleshooting the fuel system on this. One thing you'll notice is I did not crack any injector lines to do that. I never crack injector lines to make sure I'm getting fuel out of them. I'm not gonna say never, but rarely. So anyways, thanks for watching. If you have any questions on that, or if you have any suggestions for videos in the future, please let me know.